Hello, my dear friends. You're in the Military Summary channel, and today we will discuss the situation in Ukraine on the 17th of February of 2026. Today we have a lot of very interesting updates, so let's start. And first, we're going to talk about Geneva, where the trilateral meeting between Ukraine, the United States, and the Russian Federation are taking place. More precisely, when I started making this video, the meeting had already started, and most likely by the time you watch this video, most likely you will get additional details and updates about the results of the first day of meeting. So anyway, let's discuss right now everything that we have at this moment. So few important things and details. Here you can see the flight route of the Russian delegation led by Vladimir Medinsky to Geneva, and as you can see, the aircraft avoided a direct route over most European countries and flew only through Italian airspace. So this is a very interesting message that we can see from the Russian Federation and from the European countries. Another important thing is this picture. Here we can see that both the Russians and the Ukrainians were represented by lots of people. And another important thing that, according to information we have, it seems that Ukraine came to the meeting not with one delegation, but basically there were two delegations from the Ukrainian side. So the media, the Western media, call this situation as a disagreement between different people in delegation, but basically we see that there are two delegations. So disagreements are emerging within the Ukrainian delegation over the possible signing of a peace treaty under US leadership. Here's what The Economist writes. So two delegations, two groups. The first one is led by the head of the presidential office, Kirill Budanov. He believes that a quick agreement would best serve Kyiv's interests. The delegates supporting him fear that window of opportunity may soon close. The second delegation, or the other wing, which is still under Yermak's influence, is much less inclined towards this scenario, the article says. So, two delegations, two opinions. One of the delegations is saying that the conflict must be end as soon as possible, and the second one says that currently time plays in Ukrainian favor, which means that maybe it's time to think about the prolongation of the conflict for till the end of 2026 and maybe for another year, for 2027. So, but due to the fact that the entire delegation was under the control of the head of the office, Budanov, who believes that a quick agreement would best serve Kyiv's interest, there were very high chances that Ukrainians, the Americans, and the Russians were planning to sign something today. Maybe they were planning to sign some memorandum, maybe they were planning to sign some agreements or to draft agreement, or probably to schedule some deadlines for referendum or for presidential elections, but during the meeting something went wrong. And according to information we have, according to media, the British delegation led by Prime Minister Keir Starmer's National Security Advisor Jonathan Powell has arrived at the venue of the negotiations between Russia, the United States, and Ukraine in Geneva. This was reported by RIA Novosti, citing sources. Another important thing, that right after this piece of news we received additional updates that not just the British delegation arrived to the negotiation process, but also Germans and French delegations as well. And this is a very interesting situation because obviously these representatives came to Geneva just with one purpose: to control the head of the office of Ukraine, Kirill Budanov, and the head of the Ukraine's delegation. So they came to control this guy, to control this person, and not to allow him to sign anything with the Russians and with the United States of America. So which means that the Europeans came to Geneva just with one purpose: to ruin any possible agreement, any possible peaceful settlement of the conflict on the Russia's terms or on the terms of the United States of America. So this is a very interesting situation. Of course, let's wait and see what is going to be next. But if you ask my opinion, it seems that there are going to be no second day of talks at all, and most likely today the Russians will return back to Moscow with the current results that they have. So this is a very interesting situation. And another important thing, we need to understand that the European delegations of France, United United Kingdom and Germany were sent not even by the authorities of these states, but most likely they were sent under the pressure of the president of Ukraine, Zelensky, because we know that Zelensky and the head of the office, Budanov, has a certain competition between themselves. So that is why Zelensky most likely realized that everything is so bad and it's time to ruin the process from his side. So let's wait and see. Maybe it's just speculations from my side, but the situation is really very, very interesting. Now let's return back to Ukraine. As we discussed during the previous videos, during the previous video, both the Russians and the Ukrainians were preparing themselves before this negotiation process. Ukrainians attacked the territory of the Russian Federation with a significant number of drones between the 16th and the 17th of February of 2026. The Minister of Defense of the Russian Federation stated that during the night, the Ukrainians used more than 230 drones, and as for the southern direction, according to media, the Ukrainians were trying to damage or even to destroy the Ilchevska oil refinery. So we are talking about this oil refinery plant. According to this video, it's very difficult to say whether the Ukrainians managed to deal any damage to this facility, but obviously several drones managed to hit the target. As for the Russians, they did the same. During the previous night, the Russians carried out a massive combined missile and drone strike through the entire territory of Ukraine using hundreds of drones and dozens of missiles. Later this morning, the Minister of Defense of Ukraine published this article where we can see that during the previous night, the Ukrainians used 425 missiles and drones, and the Russians managed to bring down just 392. So according to this article, the Ukrainians shown very good results in their air defense. So this is the main message that Ukrainians were trying to send before the beginning of the negotiation process. And you know that even when talking about this map, we can see lots of lines, lots of roads, but we have very small number of explosions. And when talking about the ground, about the situation on the ground, several objects were attacked by Russians, and we have proofs. For example, according to this map, the Russians attacked the western part of Ukraine, the western Ukrainian substation, the power station plant in the area of the settlement by the name of Burshtyn, the Burshtyn power station. The Russians attacked the city of Odessa, and there were regular attacks along the line of combat contact that the Russians use almost every single day. So not so many explosions as you can see on the map. So when talking about this real situation, yes, we have a proof that the Russians indeed attacked the city of Odessa, and in this video we can see a very heavy explosion. The Russians attacked a substation in the central part of the city, and here we can see the consequences probably 5, 10, 15 minutes after the Russians attacked the territory. The sources are saying that currently the city of Odessa faces huge problems with hits with energy supply. There are power outages and so on. The second area that was attacked by Russians, according to these pictures, is the city of Kryvyi Rog. More precisely, the Russians also attacked the Kryvyi Rog substation, which is located to the south of the settlement. Here we can see the road of a missile that the Russians launched to attack this substation, and here we can see the consequences of attack. Probably it's a fire. And the third object of energy infrastructure that was attacked by Russia, that we have proofs, more or less reliable proofs, is the Burshtyn power station. But when talking about this power station, we have just this video where we can see how the special services of Ukraine were heading towards the Burshtyn power station, probably to stabilize the situation and something like this. And no proofs, no videos or photos from the territory of the power station itself. So once again, this attack, the Russians used lots of drones and missiles, but it seems that this attack was less effective for the Russians, of course, in comparison with previous. And this could be explained by one thing: the previous attack took place more than 14 days ago. So which means that Ukrainians during this period of time managed to accumulate lots of missiles, managed to accumulate lots of forces for this upcoming attack, and that is why the Ukrainians shown more or less normal result. At the same time, we received a report that Ukrainians are using more and more crews from the United States of America and Dutch pilots as air defense forces. As we understand, Ukrainians currently have huge problems with pilots, so that is why they are forced to use veterans. Some of the Ukrainian F-16s are flown by veteran American and Dutch pilots, and most likely this is is also probably the reason why the previous massive combined missile attack wasn't so effective for the Russians in comparison with the previous ones. But another important thing and another important detail, according to this picture, once again, the Russians were using cruise missiles of Ha-101 type. The Russians used drones, and the Russians haven't used almost even a single Iskander missile. Obviously, the Russians have possibilities to attack the territory of Ukraine with 20, 30, or 40 Iskander missiles during the nights. Also, the Russians haven't used Ha-22 missiles, supersonic missiles, and the Russians haven't used Kinzhal hypersonic missiles, which means that during the upcoming night between the 17th and the 18th of February, the Russians can repeat the massive missile and drone attack. Everything depends on the results of the Geneva talks, but once again, due to the fact that the British, the French, and the German representatives came to Geneva with the purpose, first of all, to control Ukrainians, most likely the attack in upcoming night is inevitable. Now let's discuss the situation on the ground. So we have already discussed that the Russians and the Ukrainians are attacking each other. And the Russians are trying to not just to attack Ukraine with missiles, the Russians are trying to attack Ukrainians on the ground as well. And during the previous 24 hours, according to information we have, the Russians improved their position significantly along the border. So the Russians, according to pro-Russian sources, improved their positions in the most northern part of the Sumy region, in the area of the settlement by the name of Glukhov. So these are the changes on the ground between the dates. The Russians entered the settlement of Kharkivka, and the Russians continue improving their positions. So most likely the Russians will continue offensive operation in this area, both in the western direction along this huge forest on the Russian side of the border, and the Russians will continue in the northern direction along the border with the Russian Federation almost until the road MO2. So it seems that the Russians are planning to expand their offensive operation in this area because the Ukrainians are not showing any resistance. Another important area is that the Russians entered the settlement of Ryzhovka. These are the changes on the ground. The Russians entered the settlement, and the Russians most likely will continue advancing further in the southern direction with the purpose to create a buffer zone and to cut physically the railways and the road between the city of Kiev and the city of Sumy. The Russians are going to attack in this area also not because of the logistic purposes, but also due to the situation that the Ukrainians are reducing the settlements of Tyotkina ruins. During the previous days, we received lots of videos of how Ukrainians were attacking the settlement with aviation. Lots of explosions were recorded. Almost every single building is already destroyed in this area, and the Russians are trying to create a buffer zone, a gap, just with one purpose: to reduce this pressure from the Ukrainian side on the Russian positions. Another important area is the city of Sumy itself, where the Russians are keeping advancing from the north and from the east. As for the previous 24 hours, a video was recorded from the city itself. The Russians attacked with drones a restaurant or a hotel that, according to the local sources, the foreigners, foreign forces or foreign volunteers were using for some purposes. So the Russians attacked this territory, and the Russians are keeping advancing further from the border, from the Yunakiev-Kasudy direction, in the direction of the second defense layer. As for the southeastern part, during the previous 24 hours, the map has been adjusted. This is the situation, for example, by the end of the 15th of February. This is the end of the 16th of February, and this is the end of the 17th of February. As you can see, the Russians are keeping encircling the settlement of Novodmitrievka from the north and from the south. The Russians are tasked to establish complete control over this huge forest that could be used in the future as a base for further offensive operation in the northwestern direction, first towards the settlement of Krasnopolye and then towards the city of Sumy itself. So this offensive operation most likely is going to be a very important offensive operation for the Russians during the coming 2026. As for the northeastern part of the Kharkiv region, here we have changes as well. The Russians are trying to improve their position significantly between the Liptsy and Volchansk footholds. As of the current situation, the Russians are tasked for the same thing. The Russians are trying to encircle this huge forest which is located along the river of Seversky Donets, and the Russians are planning to use this forest as a base for further offensive operation, and probably not even just in the southern direction but also in the direction of the city of Kharkiv, because this forest can protect the Russians' FPV drone operators during the summer and spring and autumn military campaigns. And from this huge forest, which is located by the way on the hill, the Russians will try to attack the city of Kharkiv itself, at least its northeastern part, with FPV drones. So the Russians most likely will try to use this foothold for further offensive operation. And due to the fact that the Russians are very active in the northeastern part of the Kharkiv region, it seems that the Russians probably have plans to continue offensive operations towards the city of Kharkiv itself if the negotiations doesn't bring any results. As for the northeastern part of the Kharkiv region along the border, according to pro-Russian sources, the Ukrainians during the previous days managed to recapture some positions, and these are the changes on the ground between the dates. This information was provided by pro-Russian sources. As of the end of the 17th of February, we still haven't received anything that can confirm this Ukrainian counter-offensive operation. As for the Kupiansk direction, during the previous 24 hours, the Russians continued bombing and attacking the settlement of Kovsharovka. According to pro-Russian sources, this is the last pockets in the northern part of the Kupiansk region. So it seems that the Russians are tasked to finish the battle for this territory also in coming days. As of now, the Russians are trying to bomb the most eastern part of the settlement of Novoosinovo, and most likely in coming days, the Russians will try to break through Ukraine's defense with the purpose to answer the Kivsharevka agglomeration from the east, and then to improve their positions and to continue offensive operation in the western direction towards the river of Seversky Donets, towards the river of Oskol. As for the Slaviansk direction, during the previous day, we haven't received almost anything, just lots of updates, lots of videos of how Russians were attacking Ukrainian positions through the area. Nothing special. The only important update probably is that the Russians answered or continue infiltration towards the settlement of Kriva Luka. Pro-Ukrainian sources reported that first sabotage and reconnaissance groups of the armed forces of the Russian Federation were recorded in the territory of the settlement, which means that most likely in coming days the Ukrainians would be forced to fall back from this area in the southern direction towards this huge forest. The Konstantinovka direction. During the previous 24 hours, we received lots of very important updates. According to pro-Russian sources, according to pro-Ukrainian sources and neutral mappers, the Russians during the previous 5 days managed to improve their positions significantly. Basically, the Russians captured completely the southwestern part of the city of Konstantinovka, and that the Russians, according to pro-Russian sources, managed to break through Ukraine's defense. Currently, the Russians are tasked to cut and to establish complete control over this pocket between the southwestern part of the city of Konstantinovka and the southeastern parts of the settlement. So now the Russians are trying to encircle this, the most southern micro-district of the city of Konstantinovka, and to force the Ukrainians to fall back from this area. If the Russians are able to take this part of the city under complete control, this is going to be something like a turning point in the battle for the city itself, and then it's going to be just a matter of time when the Ukrainians would be forced to fall back from the territory, when the Russians establish complete control over the city, and when the Russians continue offensive operation further in the direction of the cities of Druzhkovka, Kramatorsk and Slaviansk. As for the Zaporozhye direction, during the previous 24 hours, we haven't received anything special. Probably the most important update is that Ukrainians, according to neutral mappers, improved their positions around the settlement of Odradne. These are the changes on the ground that were provided by neutral mappers, and that Ukrainians, during the previous day, using the fog that covered this territory, launched a counter-offensive operation from the area of Grigorovka and Veselyanka. There were two groups of Ukrainian soldiers. The first one answered the most northern part of the settlement of the Stepnogorsk, and the second group moved further in the southern direction and answered the settlement of Plavny. So this information today was provided by several pro-Russian reliable sources and by pro-Ukrainian sources. As we understand, the main purpose of these attacks is to cut the Russians to the north of the river of Here we have canals, something like a natural barrier, and the main purpose of Ukrainians is to cut Russians from the area of the settlement of Stepnogorsk, from the territory of the settlement of Kamenska. The Ukrainians answered this territory, cuts the main logistic lines, and most likely in coming days, of course, if the Ukrainians are able to dig in deeper in this area, in coming days the Ukrainian forces will launch attacks in the direction of Primorska, Magdalinovka, Lukyanovska, with the purpose to force the Russians to fall back from this area completely. Of course, now the Russians are tasked to unblock the Russians in the area of Stepnogorsk. For these purposes, the Russians are attacking the Ukrainians in the area of Plavnia. So everything depends right now on the matter whether the Russians are able to restore control over this territory fast or not, because now the time plays in the Ukrainian favor, and if Ukrainians are able to hold these positions for 2-3 days, then most likely the Russians will have huge problems to the north of the city of Stepnogorsk, and probably the Russians would lose more territories in comparison with the current situation. And that's it for today. Military Summary channel reminds to condemn any violence in the world. Thank you for watching. Subscribe to my channel, put your likes, join my Patreon, and have a good day. Bye bye.